The problem with signatures is that they have to be checked by humans. And experts say with a little bit of practice, anybody can fake one. And all of this, of course, is based on the assumption that the person checking you out bothered to check in the first place. Sydney has the most. In fact, in this one neighborhood alone, there are 1, 2, 3 over that way, 4 down the road, 5 Thai restaurants. Think of brain mapping in terms of the way Google Earth operates. You start by taking a snapshot of the Earth, which is similar to the concept of an MRI and other forms of imaging. Zoom it down, way down to street level, and now you can see particular landmarks, buildings, in this case, the Opera House. Well, guess what? That's the cellular level in the brain. Now, scientists say this kind of view gives them a better idea of what's happening in those cells, how they perform, and why. Yes, it was, Janice. In fact, a very moving tribute wrapped up just a couple of hours ago, about 20 nautical miles directly behind me at the site of that collision in 1964. Some of the victims, family members, and some of the survivors gathered there to pay tribute to the people and an event they will never forget. For Bluey Ducker, this was one of the hardest trips he's ever had to make.
I'm starting to get uptight, getting knots in the stomach, thinking about going out over the side.
It was also a difficult journey for Peter Howes.
I can remember it as though it was last night.
They were among the 170 people, survivors and family members, aboard a Bay-class naval ship headed 20 nautical miles out to sea to the site which changed all of their lives.
And as we're going out to sea now, the memories are coming back.
Those memories were born 50 years ago to the day aboard the HMAS Voyager 2 during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Some of the men were in their bunks, others were enjoying some downtime. Most were below deck when survivors say they were told the unthinkable, that a collision was imminent.
I just thought it was another exercise.
Instead, the HMAS Melbourne slammed it at the ship's side, cutting it in two.
We went over in a couple of minutes and went down in about 5 minutes, and it was pretty horrific.
It was black, quiet. Once we're in the water, it was very quiet, very surreal, but you could hear people screaming out for help.
67 sailors, 14 officers, and 1 civilian were killed in the crash. That number would have been higher if it weren't for the bravery of Peter Rogers' father, Buck, who helped several others to safety before he lost his own life.
You know, 50 years on, still think about that day.
Which is why this trip to the crash site was so difficult for so many. To honor the friends and family members killed that day and to confront the memories.
You think you've forgotten everything and gotten over it, but you haven't. You can be okay, you can be walking down the street, and for some unknown reason, cry. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
Sorry about that. It's something you never get over.
And we ask God's help for those who today still live in the shadow of that fateful evening.
For many here, this was the first and likely last trip they'll ever make to the site, filled with so many painful memories that refuse to go away. Now, some of the survivors and some of the victims' family members will gather here one more time tonight at 8:56. That's the exact official time those two ships collided. They will be here on the naval base for a bell that will toll 82 times, once for every life lost. Back to you. Well, the winds have picked up here again. So has the fire danger. Behind me, Mount Irvine and Mount Wilson, where people have been told to shelter in place. You can see the smoke. Several spot fires have sprung up as a result of these conditions, which really have deteriorated over the last couple of hours. You know, it's amazing the number of firefighters from around the country here in the Blue Mountains still several days after those initial fires broke out. Firefighters who left their homes and families behind to help people who could really use it. Included in the 5-man crew from Bright Victoria, plenty of equipment, a can of diesel, and Noel Thatcher, who at 74 has been putting out fires for more years than most of his fellow Victorians have been alive.
The adrenaline gets there and just keeps you going, but once you stop, yeah, you fall in a heap.
Roger, strike team 2465.
Noel and the rest of this crew are volunteers who've put everything on hold for days on end to help. The concern are these pockets of dry fuel just waiting to go, which is why crews are here and across the Blue Mountains today, trying to take advantage of the conditions and the relatively low winds to do as much backburning as possible.
We don't want it jumping across the road there.
Not far away, the state's Rural Fire Service Deputy Commissioner addressed critics who say the RFS overreacted yesterday, warning people that conditions would be as bad as it gets.
I've got to say, if we didn't do those things and we'd have had devastation in the Blue Mountains yesterday, we'd have been absolutely hammered.
Dozens of crews from around the country are still here in the Blue Mountains, still working, still fighting fires, which just won't quit.
A bit tired, a bit worn out. We'll be glad to go home.
Everyone is tired, including the people who live here.
Because it's been such an emotional roller coaster. And, you know, even though you might have time to sleep, you just can't sleep. Your mind just keeps going over and over what's been happening.
I've had about 4 hours in the last week.
The lack of sleep hasn't slowed Noel Thatcher, who says his reason for fighting fires is simple.
You're doing something for the community.
And these winds and those fires behind me are expected to keep firefighters busy for several hours. One concern we keep hearing over and over and over again across the area is that the conditions are so dry. Firefighters and people who live here are concerned the fire danger will remain high not only for days or weeks, but possibly months. Back to you. Among those taking part in a traditional smoking ceremony in Redfern, Attorney General George Brandis. The ceremony represents healings and new beginnings, leaving troubles behind. That's something Mr. Brandis can't seem to do when it comes to comments he made last week about bigotry.
Hey, how are you going to explain your comments about bigotry to the audience here today?
We're here to launch the court's reconciliation plan.
You don't think that'll come up at all?
I can't imagine why we'd be talking about anything other than the court's reconciliation action plan.
Last week, when the federal government unveiled plans to make changes to the Racial Discrimination Act, the Attorney General said this.
People do have a right to be bigots, you know. In a free country, people do have rights to say things that other people find offensive or insulting or bigoted.
That has renewed a national conversation about racism.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Today, George Brandis gathered with federal and Indigenous leaders to launch the Reconciliation Action Plan of the Federal Circuit Court. It's designed to make the justice system more equitable and accessible for Indigenous people.
I want our court and my hard-working judges who are very committed to serving the people of Australia to be part of preventing any future Prime Minister of this country having to say sorry for what has been done to Aboriginal children.
Tom Calma not only applauded the launch of the program, he also had a message for the Attorney General.
So any moves to reduce the protection of my people and other Australians from the debilitating and undermining experiences of racial abuse and bigotry is an anathema to us.
Some people here say they're not only concerned about the comment about bigotry, but the message that it sends when it comes from the nation's Attorney General.
I don't care what he does, you know, but I think he should get it right.
Mr. Brandis left the event the same way he arrived, full of praise for the reconciliation plan and ignoring questions about racism. Greg Navarro, SBS World News. When trying to learn more about the human brain, it's best to start with what we don't know.
It sounds wrong that we haven't even discovered the very pathways that control the human brain, but that's in fact the truth.
Which means scientists know very little about the most complex organ in our bodies, one that never ceases to amaze them.
We know that when the brain thinks it's taking a medication to improve a function, like thinning out the blood, you can actually thin out the blood by taking a sugar tablet that you think might be thinning out your blood.
That's why scientists from around the world are joining in an effort called brain mapping to look at the brain in a way that's never been done before. Think of brain mapping in terms of the way Google Earth operates. You start by taking a snapshot of the Earth, which is similar to the concept of an MRI and other forms of imaging. Zoom it down, way down to street level, and now you can see particular landmarks, buildings, in this case, the Opera House. Well, guess what? That's the cellular level in the brain. Now, scientists say this kind of view gives them a better idea of what's happening in those cells, how they perform, and why. That detailed view will be particularly useful for combating diseases.
What happens during during a particular disease, why that communication is disrupted, and how we can fix it.
Researchers say there's another incentive to better understanding those diseases, especially forms of dementia.
If you look at the cost of treating Alzheimer's disease in the U.S. alone, $200 billion per year. In 10 years, that cost is going to go up to about $1 trillion. No world economy can sustain that.
In this country, spending on dementia is expected to exceed every other health condition.
It's a tip of the whole iceberg where it is going to explode unless we put in place, because the public funding alone will not handle it.
Which is one more reason why scientists from around the world are working together and pooling resources to create the most detailed map to date of an organ that remains such a mystery. Greg Navarro, SBS World News.